Hi everyone, I hope that you all had a nice break and a good start into 2022. I am Tiffaine Beauperrin and I'm delighted to moderate this first FERMA webinar of the year on how to assess your risk and opportunities related to remote work. This is basically the second webinar dedicated to this topic. And I must say that 6 months ago, we didn't think that the topic would still be as relevant as it is today. In some European countries, like in Belgium, where I am, teleworking remains compulsory. In other countries, it's highly recommended and it's part of our array of measures to try to fight the renewed increase of COVID-19 cases. But more generally, this forced shift to teleworking because of the pandemic has prompted many organizations to rethink their working methods and to take a more intentional strategic approach to remote work. So today we will discuss, practically speaking, how to assess risk and opportunities related to remote work. We will base our discussion on a very new tool that FERMA is publishing today, which is a simplified risk mapping tool for remote working. This tool has been developed by a group of leading risk managers from companies in Belgium, France, Italy, and Sweden. And it is built on the work that the French Risk Management Association, AMRAE, has done previously for SMEs. And I'm very pleased because all members of the working group are present today and will illustrate the tool with their real-life examples. I'm also delighted because we are joined today by Andrea Glorioso, so welcome, from the European Commission's Directorate General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. Andrea is working on the future of work and digitalization policies. But before starting, a couple of words about the tool. And you should normally see now on the screen the tool, an example of the tool, which is released together with a guide. Basically, this tool is a simple questionnaire that organizations of any size can use. It sets out a template of risk and opportunities linked to remote working, divided into 7 important categories. We could call them the risk universes: strategic, financial, security and safety, operational, regulatory and compliance, and technological. And for each category, there are a series of questions that will prompt the user to consider what exposure the organization could have to certain risk in this category and their potential consequences. And then there is a simple scoring system of impact and likelihood of each categories of risk automatically created, and it creates automatically basically a heat map and a radar screen visual. So it's a simple and practical tool which will help organizations to identify and assess their risk and to take advantage also of all the opportunities related to this new way of working. I will now introduce the members of the project group. So Laurence Ekman is Vice President Risk Management at Electrolux Group, which is a leading global home compliance company. Laurence is also a member of the board of FERMA. Gabriela Freire is the insurance manager at Prysmian Group, who is a world leader in cable manufacturer, energy solutions, telecom cables and systems industry. And Gabriela is also Vice President of ANRA, the Italian Risk Management Association. Philippe Noirot is a Group Risk Management Deputy Director at Orange, an international multi-service operator in the telecoms industry, and is also a member of the board of AMRAE, the French Risk Management Association. And Gaëtan Lefrèvre is Group Risk Insurance and Ethics Manager at John Cockerill Group, an engineering company. And Gaëtan is the president of Belrim, the Belgium Risk Management Association, and a board member of FERMA. But before we get started, let me remind you that you are all welcome to ask questions all along the webinar using the chat box, and I will be taking your question during the Q&A after the interventions. So I'd like to turn now to our speakers with the following first question. How have the risks and opportunities from remote work changed for your organization over the past 6 months? Laurence, would you like to kick off?
Thank you, Tiffen, and hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar. So first of all, when we speak about remote working, I think something which is quite important to say is that in our company, we don't speak about all our employees. We have about 52,000 employees, and we have 42 factories. People working in factories will not have the possibility to work remotely. They have to work 100% in the factory. So we only speak about those in the offices, for instance, generally speaking. And it's also very difficult to summarize in 2 minutes. But if I have to pick on one of the strategic element, is that we created a policy, internal policy, which is 60-40% policy, where people are supposed to go in the office 60% of the time and work remotely 40% as an hybrid solution. And what we have seen lately, so it's that, so when this is only when COVID is not applying, it's just in a normal situation, which we have had a few months, because on the COVID situation, of course, this is something else. But we see a lot of differences where people sometimes want to stay 100% home, or they want to go to work 100%. So it's still very difficult to see what that policy, 60%, 60-40, has as an impact, and can that really be applicable? So what we have seen is that it's difficult to apply a policy like this. We will need to test it. That's really important. And then from a strategic point of view, we need to see risks and opportunities. The opportunities is the efficiency of people working from home. The risk is, of course, if people don't come and meet, we will lose this innovation and collaboration aspect, which is really central of the working area.
Thank you, Laurence, for sharing this insight. Philippe, are you facing the same situation?
Yeah, I acknowledge what you said, Laurence, and that's probably the same everywhere in many companies. I would say that globally speaking, in France, at least before the pandemic, many employees had already a possibility to update their working conditions with remote working prior to the COVID crisis. Therefore, I would say most of the risks were already identified and assessed in the risk maps beforehand. And the pandemic has been an accelerator with much more employees concerned. This has, I think, definitely made some risks higher, as probability was higher, and create new challenges such as remote management, keep in touch with the employees, with the team, efficiency of the administrative process, or cyber defense issues with the increasing number of access. It has also created perhaps opportunities, I would say less fixed cost maybe, and efficiency of administrative process, which is maybe better because people home-based are less disturbed by some discussions, whatever. So it has to be balanced, and definitely the process of remote working analysis started far prior to the last 6 months, maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago already.
Okay, interesting. Gabriela, is it the same for you? Because in a manufacturing industry, I guess that's not, everybody, like for Laurence, has, the opportunity to do some teleworking. So what is the situation and what has changed?
Okay, thank you, Tiffen. Good afternoon to all. Yes, the situation is the same, but I would like to start from a risk that we have highlighted during our first webinar. The strategic need to attract and retain top talent that has grown a lot in the last period. So the persistence of the pandemic crisis has somehow stopped the process related to the proposal of new procedures designed by our organization. In Prismian case, for example, we have a new policy ready that it can be still used given the persistence of the state of emergency. So based on the trend of infection at present, we were invited to return to the office on a voluntary basis with a maximum presence of 30% per week. At a general level in Italy, we have what we have been able to observe in recent months has really disappointed me. Let me explain. Many companies that spoke of new organizational models, more flexible, as soon as it was possible, returned to the pre-COVID era, making all the efforts made vain and losing the opportunity to take a step forward. The consequence is that employees, especially the new generation, are moving towards those organizations that have promptly put in place the flexible policies that are ready in offering more flexible working options. And just this morning, I read an article that reported that this data, out of 20,000 workers, 58% believe that the pandemic has forced them to rethink the balance between work and personal life. In Italy, only 1 in 5 people think that compensation is the main factor for choosing a job, with flexibility taking on an increasingly important role. So with this awareness, what are our organization waiting for? I really think that the time has come to turn this big risk into an opportunity.
Thank you, Gabriela. Very good comment indeed. And there will be this, dichotomy between, the practices in some organization and also what the young generation will be looking for. Gaëtan, what are your views on that?
But it's a combination of what the other speakers say. Our company are present internationally. That means that the situation is different country by country. We forgot, but the crisis started in China 2 years ago. And China is a completely different situation than us in Europe. Secondly, we have blue collars active not in our factory, but in factories of our clients. So as Laurence or Gabriela mentioned, that means that people need to continue to work with the risk of cluster and something like that, and also with the risk that the client impose some difficult rules to be followed. And the second point is the engineering part with people working by team. So we are working on project, and you have a team for each project. And just after I think it's the first wave, we decided to come back to 3 days present in the office and 2 days remote work. And the fourth wave arrived, and we need to come back to more remote work. And the problem here is to continue to monitor our team on the project, to maintain also cohesion between the teams. Some people are manage that point very easily, but others need to be followed by the management. So it's a risk, but it's also opportunity to develop new way of work.
Yeah. And for you, Laurent, so Gabriela mentioned some of the challenge, and also Gaëtan, for you, what would be the biggest risk opportunity for your organization in the near future then?
I think the financial aspect is really the one that we could think of. I mean, there are opportunities, but the financial aspect, we can see that quite clearly, in the sense that the work space is not used 100% all the time, and we have seen that during the autumn, that it's in most of the case 50% of the space is empty. So from a sustainability point of view, from a cost point of view, electricity, I mean, there is a great opportunity, but the important is really to measure that, not to just see that there are empty offices, but we need to do something about that. So the opportunity is there, the risk is there if we can't get away from contract, renting contract, or if we own those buildings. What do we do with those? So there is work to do on that matter. But the financial aspect is really what I see as the big part, and I just mentioned the financial for the organization, but it's also financial for people. Again, they see also the opportunity not to have to commute. You know, we make quite a lot of savings, and speak about attracting talents. Then the young generation having, you know, the sustainability, looking that we try not to use too much of our cars. We don't need to commute that much. We use less electricity. It's also attracting talent because of this philosophy, if we do that right.
Indeed. And for you, Philippe, what is the biggest risk and opportunity for your company? Philippe?
I don't mean it's the main one for the company, but I think it's something which concerns all the companies who are playing with remote working. I guess that isolation of employees may be a serious concern because it comes also from the society itself, not only from at the level of the company. We need probably to consider that management is under an higher pressure for many reasons, inside and outside the company, with therefore less time to speak to their team individually. And for the people who are the employees who are the more fragile, I think it's a serious risk that we have to take into account. That implies training and awareness for the managers, a new kind of training on awareness, but also that implies the need to check the efficiency of the alert system in order to enable early detection of personal situation and psychosocial risk as well. So it's really a concern, not only for my company, but I think for all the companies to follow this up.
Gabriela, so you mentioned retaining and finding new talents. Any other big risk or opportunity for your company?
I think there's the big opportunity to retain our talents and to attract new talents is to invest more on well-being of employees. Employee well-being sprang to the top of many organization priority over the past 2 years. The struggle to separate personal lives from work commitments and switch off at the end of the day is leading to more stress and anxiety among some employees. We know very well that the pandemic period has completely disrupted the daily life of company professionals and will be so until this emergency won't be over. On one hand, we have learned about the negative consequences of a model that makes the distinction between private and working life blurred. On the other hand, we understood that implementing effective adaptation strategies is the future for our companies. So I think that this is the big opportunity for my organization. The growing attention to sustainability issues also pushes towards the adoption of new model of work, health, environmental well-being, and productivity reasons lead to see flexible working as a tool to be encouraged to combine health precaution and the real sustainable restart.
And if we now turn to the tool itself that you all contributed to develop, so can you tell us a little bit more about how you would recommend using this tool? You know, Philippe, what would be your recommendation?
I think that this tool is a source of inspiration for the risk managers who have not really tackled the remote work topic yet. In addition, this is an enabler to check whether the risk map is complete and accurate for those who have already remote work risk assessed. And anyway, I believe it's a source of brainstorming with the human resources function to see what kind of actions are in place or to be strengthened in order to better prevent or mitigate the risks. It looks like a very simple tool, yes, But even if you believe you've got already everything under control in your risk map and your risk management process, I'm afraid I'm an ERM guy for a long time, and I can tell you that often I did discover interesting elements missing in the risk map only when reading document apparently basic. So don't refrain from doing it. It's a source of inspiration, a source of brainstorming, and a source of check. So do it, please.
Laurence, anything to add?
I can only agree with you, Philippe. It really helps facilitating. You look at different scenarios, and we think we think we have the subject under control. But looking at the scenario, it will give us good ideas to facilitate some discussion, and also to find scenarios which are maybe even more adapted to our own company. And then it's not like it needs to be taken and adapted as is. First of all, we can find new scenarios. Those are a good basis. But then the way they are measured, we see the measure here, which is impact and likelihood. I know all companies don't use those two scales. And in our group, for instance, we use the impact, but we don't use the likelihood. We use what we call the risk factor. So how prepared are we to face that risk? So what are the controls in place? But that's fine. We can still use the tool very well, even though the measurement is a bit different.
Mm-hmm. Gaëtan, if I want to follow up on what Laurence has just said, so what tools do you use for your own risk identification analysis, and how can elements of that be seen in the tool that FERMA developed?
I have no specific tool for that point, but I am very interesting to use this one developed with FERMA and based on AMRAE experience. What I would add to what Philippe and Laurence said, it's also an opportunity for the risk manager to have the role, a transversal role, and to include human resources, but also financial and other support function, and to be a key player in that approach. Human resources don't use very often a risk map, so it's a way to influence the new way of work, and also to sensitize people to use the risk mapping. In our company, it's internal audit who does globally the risk mapping. So I am very happy to present this kind of tool to the different function, and to demonstrate the add value of the risk management in that area.
And for you, Gabriela, what would be your use of this tool?
I think, and I agree with the other speaker, that it represents also for our community, for the community of risk management, a useful tool to discuss with a common and simple language to our HR department, and also for the small and medium enterprises to have a very practical tool that makes the reading of risk and their impacts understandable to anyone. It doesn't require expertise on enterprise risk management to answer the question that we found together.
Yeah, I agree, Gabriel. I think it's a categories of risks like another. So identification is the same than for the other kind of risks. You have, in a nutshell, the usual one: bottom up, top down, context analysis, events, and discussions with experts. So just do it with the people you know they know, and try to get the best, and to build your own risk map with the help of the tool. But this is a risk like a kind of risk like another, in fact, for an ERM.
So it's basically a useful tool to communicate internally. And if we go again a bit deeper in this area of communication, how do you communicate your risk analysis in general, and I would say in around this topic related to remote work, for example, to the board or of the risk committee? How do you communicate? So Laurence?
Yeah, I can continue on what Philippe said. So we use the heat map. This is the best way to really communicate and say which are the key risks for the group, and to be able to show a heat map where we have put the risk and compare with each other. We need that kind of tool to be able to assess them. So we have those different categories. We have what we call this risk register, and then how we communicate to the board is the heat map, and we focus on the large ones, the important ones. So so that's how we do, and then the board will then focus on those ones. And as Philippe said, it's one risk amongst the others, so we will not bring that separately to the others. We need to put the risk of the entire enterprise, and maybe there won't be any remote working risk to be shown to the board, because maybe they are all under control or they are all assessed to be not severe. So in that case, nothing will be discussed, you see.
Yeah. And for you, Gaëtan, how do you communicate your risk analysis related to remote work to the board?
First of all, we discuss the point. So we have a crisis cell in place from the beginning of the COVID crisis. So first of all, it is discussed in that area, and after that to the executive committee, presented to the executive committee. So we prepare the work and it's approved by the executive committee.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And for you, Gabriela, how is it organized, this discussion?
Oh, yes, I think, and looking also to the other colleagues when we talk about risk to other colleagues' function, is very useful to use a method, to have a tool that support you in analyzing risk. I would like to mention a very simple tool that we use in the risk identification phase, the checklist, for example. At the early stage of risk identification, it can be used to learn from past project and team member experience. So it's exactly what we do with our group project, sharing our experience and trying to identify all the fundamental aspects to better analyze the risk and opportunities of remote working. So using a tool that provide also visual data, such as heat map and radar, will be easier to communicate with other function and senior management. I think that this is the point, to have a tool that help you in communicate in a easy way with a simple language.
Mm-hmm. And Philippe, how would you recommend on using the tool in terms of putting mitigation into action?
I believe, once again, it's a source of inspiration or check, but also it's a source to discuss with the HR function and to analyze whether some of the elements you've got in this tool are really a risk, or maybe they are a cause. And if they are a cause, maybe they add an additional level of probability to some other risks, such as, I don't know, cyber risk or other kind of risk, as mentioned up front. So this has really to be used as a source to improve the discussion and the involvement of the HR function, if it's not enough, in the risk mapping exercise. Also, it can be in turn communicated first to the HR function once it is analyzed, but also if there is a specific level or high level of risk in the risk map, that can be a topic for a Zoom at the governance level, if need be, if it is really a topic at group level or at company level. So I think, in a nutshell, mitigation will come not from the risk manager himself. He can suggest some mitigation, but he is not the one in charge of mitigating the risk. This is the role of, let's say, most of the time, the HR function.
Gaëtan, any comment to what Philippe has just mentioned?
No, I fully agree, and again, it's an opportunity to embed it as a function. as I said, HR function don't use on daily basis risk mapping. Donc, it's really an opportunity to develop this kind of approach. Here, it is for the remote work where we can imagine other topic to embedded support function of this kind of approach. So remote work, it's an evidence today, but people go through remote work without thinking about all related risk. So with this kind of tool, it's a way to oblige people to think about it, to think about consequences, positive or negative. And it's important to do that. And Philippe mentioned maybe it could be considered as basic, but based on this kind of basic stupid questions, you can have very intelligent answers. It's also my experience. So when you start a discussion with responsible HR or operational guys, after that kind of discussion, I receive very often the comment, "Oh, you oblige me to think about what could happen." And it's a little bit out of the box, out of the usual problems they are to solve. And it's important.
Which is a reaction always surprising for us as risk managers, because management should be firstly a risk management.
Exactly. Yeah. And yes, Philippe, and people who forgot that the owner of the risk is not the risk manager. The owner of the risk is the manager.
Yeah, and what I'd like to do now is to move on to the audience discussion. So basically, this is your chance to submit questions using the chat box. So we'll try to get through as many as we can in the next 10 minutes. So I will now take some of the questions that is arriving from the chat. So the first one is from Chiara. What is a better tool to help with impact and likelihood of events? Qualitative methods or quantitative? Who would like to start answering? Please take the floor.
I can speak if
Laurence?
you want. Yeah. So I think if we forget the quantitative part, we will not be able to assess and to prioritize the mitigation action. So I come with a negative statement. So for me, the quantitative aspect is definitely crucial to be able to prioritize risks and prioritize mitigation actions.
Okay. Gabriela, any further comment?
No, I agree with Laurence because it's really something important to have the quantitative aspects and so yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's difficult to quantify, I guess. Huh?
Yes,
Yes.
as I would say, we can start with a qualitative discussion and move to the quantitative in the second step.
I agree.
It's always easier.
Yeah, because quantification is always a challenge. Qualitative approach is the challenge is to get a consensus around the level of assessment, but quantification will become probably a rule or a legal rule for some kind of risk in the future. We will see that coming. For the time being, there is no best method. I think it's a combination of both, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
But then the quantification can also have some step. You can start basic and you can continue. The most complex are the Monte Carlo analysis and so on. We don't speak about that quantification if we are not ready, but you also have a maturity level from within the quantification.
I have another question from Emanuele. How do you see a segmentation of employees that can remote work versus those that need to be in the office? Okay, so yeah, it's about the question is about basically having a part of the employees being able to do remote work and those who cannot?
That's cultural, if I may, and that is in link with some social factors as well, not only at the level of the company, but at the level of a country, for instance. And for sure, that can lead to a kind of jealousy, I don't know, inequality feeling, injustice feeling, I don't know, something like that, which is not good at all inside a company. So I think that when setting up the rules for remote working, the company, the HR function has to be very careful towards what is going to be the feeling, the ideas of the people, the employees not able to telework, to remote working. Mm-hmm. This is crucial because you need to keep the cohesion of the teams.
Fully agree. And also, HR function need to think in reward for people obliged to stay in the office.
Gabriela, I guess that this is
yes,
a topic
that
has been discussed extensively within your company.
Yes, the regulatory also aspects, because we have to look also to the national rules and what the laws and the contracts give us as opportunities that we can follow. And you know that in our companies the cultural aspect is also another aspect that we have to consider, because the new generation are different from the old one, and so also the way to work and the way to think to the future is different. And our management have to think a lot about that point.
I have a question for Laurent specifically. Can you clarify what you use if not using likelihood in your impact matrix?
We use the we have the impact, so the severity from low to extreme severity, and that's based on, can be financial aspect, it can be loss of market share, it can be loss of reputation, it can be also loss of people. I mean, you see, that's the impact severity. And then the difference, the probability that we don't use, we use the risk factor. So how well are we prepared to face the risk? From sufficient prepared, so we have all the control in place, we have procedure, we have needs improvement, so we have quite good policies in place, but they need some tweak. We have deficient, so we might miss a few policies. I give an example. Or we have red flags. So for instance, we have no control in place, or the risk is moving so much that we need to keep adapt the control all the time. So it's really, it's kind of the resilient factor, if I can say. But the probability, we decided not to have it because it's too many questions about how many percentage are we talking about. We really want to focus on the resilience.
Okay. And I will take a last and final question before we will move on. Do you have any advice on how to consider risk related to remote working in a bigger picture, and how you would seek to elevate the priority of risk as they relate to remote work? Any advice?
Maybe I'm not going to answer exactly the question, but I think there is a trend, not only one, by the way, but at least a trend, which is remote working is now an expectation from applicants in some positions at least, and maybe tomorrow in many positions. So for a company, it would become a risk not to offer it, but mainly a risk not to be aware of the pros and the cons of that, and therefore setting up inappropriate rules to follow up these risks and opportunities attached to the remote work. So this is really a point to consider by the HR function as a source of attractivity, as Gabriela was saying up front, but also as a source of a weakness if we are not able to guarantee the balance between those who are possibly remote working and those who can't, and also the support we give to the remote workers is not out of stupid, I mean. So we have to remain clever in what we do anyway. So I think it's liaising to the social fracture that I was mentioning as well. We have to pay very much attention to that, and not only a company, but all the companies, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Laurence, you wanted to add anything?
Yes,
Yeah.
because sorry, because I agree, but I don't agree totally with the. So I would like to add something about what you say, Philippe. Is that so? What we see in our and what we try to do in our company is that we try to tell that some function will require that you need to work 100% from the office, and that will be a big aspect, a change, I think, for people in the future on how they choose their job. What kind of function do you want to have in the future? In the past, you would like to be an engineer, you would like to work with finance, etc. But now it might be a new element. How do I want to balance my life or the way I work? For instance, the finance community will, in many cases, not be able to work remotely because we have very sensitive data information. So maybe some people in the future will also change or choose the job in taking this into consideration. And that is a big shift, I think, because that didn't happen in the past, at least not in our group. So
yes,
you spoke about the social. Sorry.
Yes, no, Laurence, if I can add, because we also can lose our productivity employees, the employees in the factories, and they can think to change and to have the same opportunity of the white collar. So I think it's an important point, this one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I have to ask this last question, which has just came, through the chat. It's related to insurance. We haven't touched insurance yet. So, how does remote working affect insurance purchasing? For example, cyber insurance, employer liability, and property. Who would like to start?
But for me, the impact is. If you look to cyber, clearly, remote work imposes to have robust IT system. And clearly, the impact is not a direct impact, but cyber insurance check the quality of the IT system and also the quality of the security of the system. Because remote work is a risk, clearly, for that. Property is what Laurence of Gabriel mentioned. So if you reduce the number of your offices, you have directly an impact because you reduce the number of the value to be insured. And what is important for employers' liability or workman insurance, be sure that everything is acceptable for the insurer. For example, if something happens in your home, what happens? What is the evidence you need to give to the insurer to be sure that this is acceptable for the insurance? So there is some important point to be checked for the different aspect. But for me, the most easy is the property because it's increasing or decreasing the value to be insured. Cyber, it's security, and employer liability is more linked to the possible accident of the employees.
Mm-hmm. Gabriela,
yes, and also, yes, there is a big aspect that we will have this year to discuss a lot with the insurance company, because the situation of the hard market and the exclusions, the limits of capability show us as the pandemic has changed the insurance market, and for our community is a big risk.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you very much, Laurence, Gabriela, Philippe, and Gaëtan. I think we could go on for hours, but I'd like now to welcome Andrea Glorioso, who works at the European Commission in the Directorate General for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. So Andrea is working on the future of work and digitalization topic, focusing in particular on remote and hybrid work, the right to disconnect, and youth employment. So Andrea, my first question to you is, do you have any reaction to what you've heard, during the panel discussion, or reaction regarding the tool that we have just presented?
Well, my first reaction would be, first of all, to thank you for having me here. And besides, the diplomatic thank you, a very substantive thank you, because I think this is an incredibly useful discussion, and we should have more of these discussions between the people in the field, the people who actually have to take the decisions related to the big changes in the world of work that we have been seeing, including but not limited to the shift to remote work. Obviously, and if there will be the time, I can say a few words about that later. At the European Commission, we're not the only ones, but we are looking at the potential developments also from a regulatory point of view that telework might entail. But the reality is that we cannot do that unless we have a much better understanding of what's actually happening in the field, what is driving the decisions, what are the risk assessments, what are the opportunities, and so on and so forth. So first and foremost, thank you for sharing all of these insights with me. Maybe just I took quite a few notes of everything that I was listening to, and I do have 3 or 4 points that struck me particularly. One was, and this was said right at the beginning, the fact that this guidance is, if understood correctly, is supposed to be applicable to companies of all size, organizations of all sizes. And I think this is extremely important, because let us not forget that if you look at the European Union, 98% of companies are small and medium enterprises. And so whatever tool, whether risk management or otherwise, we collectively, we Europeans come up with, it has to be usable also by those companies. Now, I understand there are challenges and different availabilities, but we also need to be a bit careful not to create, as I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, not to create tools that only very large companies can actually use in practice. I don't know enough of this tool, but just by looking at it, it seems to me that it's very concrete and very practical, which is exactly what SMEs tell us they need in their daily operations. The second point is, and this was a point also discussed towards the beginning. Yeah, clearly, right now, there are jobs that can be teleworked, let's say, and others where remote work is possible, and others where it is not. According to recent research that we conducted, actually, the Joint Research Center of the European Commission and Eurofound, our agency, the tripartite agency in Ireland, between, and of course, take the numbers with a pinch of salt, but between 32 and 40% of all jobs across all sectors can be teleworked. That leaves out quite a few jobs, of course, that cannot be teleworked, but it's still a very substantial numbers. And what's interesting is that this was done to survey also of management of the various companies. One of the methods that before the pandemic, most managers thought that jobs, that particular job could not be teleworked. Then the pandemic hit, everybody was forced to telework, and after the pandemic, the same manager said, well, no, actually, it can be teleworked with pros and cons, but this reality hit everybody. And what I would like to point out there is, I think we need to be collectively a bit careful in not underestimating the impact of technology. What I mean to say is that if you look at the background behind me, which is not a virtual background, it's a real background. Music is one of my passions, and I use at some point even to think that we'll go into it professionally. If you think how music as a sector, as a professional sector was 20 years ago, nobody would have said, or anybody would have told you, well, you can't do music unless you are in presence with each other. There's no other way that you can compose music, that you can execute music, that you can produce music. the reality today is very different. In the music sector, not for every task in the music sector, but a large part of the music sector is the jobs are remote, and that is thanks or due, depending on who you ask, to technology. So I think there we need to be a bit careful not to think that even factory jobs on the factory floor, some of those might become teleworkable in the not so distant future. So if we have a risk assessment approach, we ought to keep that in mind as well. The third point, which I must say I personally particularly appreciate, because I do feel it sometimes it's not underestimated, but I do think it should be much more at the forefront, is about the well-being of everybody, in whether it's management or employees, but that really requires, I don't want to say if there is a benefit of the pandemic, because quite frankly, I don't think there is any benefit out of this pandemic, but if one wants to see a small silver lining out of the past 2 years, is that it really forced us as a society, all of us, to rethink a lot about the priorities, to rethink a lot about, okay, what is really important. And a lot of discussions about well-being, of course, they're always where. It's not like before the pandemic, companies did not care about employees' well-being, so I'm not saying that, but that the issue has come up much more at the forefront, and therefore we, of course, also need the tools to think about it. I would think more carefully. And on that, maybe a word of caution, not necessarily from the panel, but I find it sometimes that people associate a little bit too easily telework with better well-being or physical, in-presence work with better well-being. It depends on the situation. You can feel very isolated even in an office with 100 people around you. And you can be extremely social and extremely productive and not feel isolated at all at home. It depends on many, many factors. All I'm saying is that is definitely, I'm very glad to hear that this came up as one of the points. And very last point, which perhaps should be the first, and it's certainly how we are looking at remote work at the European Commission. Again, we should be extremely careful not to think that what we went through in the past 2 years is the model of remote work. Because what we went through in the past 2 years was a crisis. We could have a discussion whether our risk management models at societal level actually were up to date to deal with that crisis. My personal view is that they were not, and we were caught very unprepared from many points of view in dealing with that crisis. But the reality is that very pragmatically, somebody who was forced to telework, first thing, it was not a choice for many workers. They had to telework, and many of them were not ready and were not willing to telework, but still had to telework. Secondly, many workers, workers, managers, many people in any organization had to telework while at the same time having children at home doing remote learning, while at the same time having not really knowing how to do shopping because shops were closed, etc. So the way in which we addressed the remote work in the past 2 years is not necessarily the way in which we should think about remote work for the future, assuming, of course, but that's our assumption, that we will fairly soon get out of the worst moments of the past pandemic. But so these are the four main things that I gather from this most interesting discussion. And again, thank you very much, because it was really very instructive for me.
Thank you very much for your feedback, Andrea. And if we go now into your role at the European Commission, and how does it relate to what you've heard, to the work that you're doing, or if you could elaborate a little bit on the work that the Commission is doing on the future of work?
Yes, of course. Maybe I will focus specifically on remote work, because if we started to talk about the future of work, there are so many things we could, although I find it, of course, intellectually fascinating, and it is part of my job, but it's maybe better, if you don't mind, to restrict ourselves a little bit. Also, I'm Italian, so if you let me talk too much, we can go on until tomorrow morning. So let's try to be more focused. Look, on remote work, telework, remote work, hybrid work, people are using many different terms, and I think we have to recognize that from a legal point of view, these different terms do not mean the same things in the different regulatory regimes. So there comes a moment where we need to be precise, but in this discussion, I think we can safely use the term remote work in a slightly more or less precise term. Look, the situation is that we have been asked very clearly by the European Parliament, so by the representatives of European citizens, to assess the situation when it comes to telework, including but not limited the right to disconnect in the European Union, and come up with a legislative proposal to regulate the environment. Now, our position is that, of course, this is a request from the European Parliament. We take those requests very, very seriously, as we should. On the other hand, we also think that we need to look at the situation very carefully, because the fact, first of all, we need to understand where, if you look at the very broad environment of telework, of remote work, as we heard today, there are risks, there are negative risks, there are positive risks. Also, we need to look at the different elements of telework. There are risks and opportunities from a productivity point of view, from a well-being point of view, from an environmental point of view. So there are many different aspects we need to look at. And last but not least, there is an incredible role that social partners, trade unions, labor unions, and employers have to play here, because at the end of the day, as I said from the start, you are the ones who know best what's actually happening on the ground. There might be, to be clear, there can be areas where a regulatory intervention at the European level, also to avoid triage between different member states, to have countries going in one direction and others in other directions, might be necessary when it comes to the right to disconnect, where a lot of countries actually in Europe have already legislated, already have rules in place on that. France is the first that comes to mind, but it's not the only one. It is possible that a regulatory intervention might be needed. To cut a long story short, what we are doing at the moment, and this is also why my participation in this panel is extremely very practical, useful for me, for us, is that we are in the process of running a quite large fact-finding study that will look at all the different, I would say, risks and opportunities across the member states to gather data. We also want to think a little bit what the different scenarios might look like. So we're a bit early in the process. At a later stage, it is possible. We're not excluding the possibility of coming up with some kind of legislative proposal, but I have to admit, at this moment, it is tricky, because even if we were, imagine for a moment, to be very concrete, let's do a European law on remote work. What does that mean? On that specifically, would we write that legislation? So where we are at the moment, I think, recognize that there is a question out there. There are many questions related to remote work. We think there are risks, we think there are opportunities. The panelists have talked very abundantly about many of them. We do want the European Commission to engage with all stakeholders, including risk managers in large, if possible, also less large companies. And once we have a better understanding of the situation, we will move forward. On this note, I really hope that we can engage with FERMA moving forward, as I actually studied risk management many years ago. So I do think that the risk management approach is extremely relevant in this context and in these discussions.
Thank you, Andrea. Any reaction from our panelists to what Andrea said? Gabriela?
No, I'm happy that the well-being topics was aligned with the discussion at in the European Commission, because I think that it's really important, because first of all, we are people that work for our organization, so we will start from human resources. So I think that's very, very important.
Philippe?
I'm glad to hear that. I believe that most of us, we would be happy to help our country risk manager or government risk managers to brainstorm, to think about their ERM approach, maybe, and to anticipate and mitigate risk and prevent risk as much as they can at a good price, if I may say so, because there is always the balance between the risk and the cost, obviously.
Gaëtan?
Also impressed by the speech. But what we speak about well-being, it's not an opposition between remote work and office work. Both are complementary, and we need to continue to find the right balance, because the objective of what is the most important is not the objective of the people itself, it's the objective of the company. And to reach this objective, to have people in a good well-being. So be careful. Sometimes I heard that people oppose remote work to work in the office. No, it's a combination. The future is a combination of both in order to reach the objective of the company.
And Laurence, a reaction or concluding remark?
Yes, thank you. And it was a very good summary or starting point. The point that you captured, Andrea, were really, really good. And what I also liked is really the fact that you want to align between what's going in the companies and what the regulatory will do, because that's really important to make sure that we are aligned. And that you base what the future regulatory aspect on facts. And you could hear from what we say is that for us it's an emerging risk. We don't understand ourselves what are the consequences. So it's really a long term. It's not something that can be decided tomorrow. We really need to understand first what kind of risk we have, better understanding before we can put a law behind or to regulate that part.
So if I may add something,
yes,
I think it's also a question of risk appetite at the society level. I mean that citizens are more and more risk averse, and they push regulators and lawyers to have new law which are preventing the risk. And there is always a debate between risk and freedom. So risk management should not be only freedom breaking. We have to pay attention to that. Society debate.
So Andrea, we definitely stand ready to contribute. So do not hesitate to be in touch, and we'll make sure that we stay available. So basically, the webinar is coming to its end. I'd like to really thank our panelists and members of the working group for their time they devoted today, but also during the project to develop this tool. Thank you to Andrea for being with us also and for explaining what you are working on right now. So following this session, you will be receiving the tool by email together with the replay as well as the slides. And before closing, I'd like to finish with some words about the European Risk Manager Survey 2022 that we have just launched, because I'd like to encourage all risk managers present today to answer the survey. Your input is extremely important in order to better understand the evolving roles and responsibilities of the profession in Europe, notably related to all the topics we've discussed today, but also ESG, sustainability, digitalization. So I really hope that you will take some of your time to answer it. Thank you everybody again for joining. Stay tuned for our next webinar, which will be dedicated to the new Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It will be in early March. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.